Hello everyone, welcome to another Flesh and Blood video. I know I said last week that since we're done with all of the Rosetta heroes, we were going to take a look at Ira. However, because I recently got top 8 with Oscilio in a ProQuest, that we should take a look at the Oscilio list that I played. I've been seeing a lot of Oscilio lists going around, but personally, I really don't like many of them. Cheerios just feels at home for me, so I'm going to be showing you, I guess, sort of an updated list from the original video with, less, more like techier options. You know what I mean? Normally my videos are more slated towards a newer player, but this is the one that I played at a big event, which a lot of the cards are the same. So most of it will be this very similar, but there are a few newer additions, a few updates to Oscilio that have happened since that original video. So with all of that, let's get started. Starting with, of course, the hero, Oscilio Constella Intelligence. So I'm not going to go over him again, but really what you need to know is that he can help fix your bad hands. There are times where you have extra instants in your hand that you can't play, or you need to dig for an answer to something. Oscilio can help with that. If you have a hand that's meant to just play a bunch of instants and do a burn spell, you really don't need an electrostatic discharge or a somersault. But if you already have a sigil of conductivity in play, and you're not playing against a deck that can actually remove it, this card can just be cycled away to Oscilio's ability to find something else, and that's really helpful. It lets his deck just run itself, letting you cycle through different types of hands really easily. And his lack of 4 health really doesn't matter all too much in the matchups that Oscilio is good against. Of course, it will hurt you versus your bad matchups, which we will talk about. But I really like this hero. He isn't the best because he's not as powerful. He's not as fast as the other aggro decks, but he's incredibly good at dealing with a lot of the slower decks in the format, which is a reason why you might want to play him over some other aggro decks. The main board equipment suite is pretty similar. Volzar being the just best in slot weapon for Oscilio, same as Lightning Greaves being the best in slot shoe. We are of course on Aether Bindings just for a bit of extra damage when we need it, as well as 1 block. We are mainboarding the Flash of Brilliance, but you're not going to be using this one all too much. Flash of Brilliance will be used whenever we don't want any of the helmets in our sideboard, which is why it's up here to talk about in the main board. And then finally, we are mainboarding a Blossom of Spring, mainly because most of Oscilio's games are going to be pretty quick. We do have Tunic in the sideboard because we are on some cards that cost a fair bit more amount of resources, but into a lot of the aggro decks we will want Blossom of Springs, and those are generally our tougher matchups. So it's up here as well, because I do usually keep this one around with the rest of these equipment, because most matchups we're playing Flash, we're probably playing Blossom. Although some matchups like KO, we will play Blossom and not Flash. It really depends on the matchup if you're bringing Blossom or Tunic, but a lot of your aggro ones, as I said, are going to be Blossom. Looking at the main board, we can see that it is pretty similar to the original deck list, although we do have a fair amount of changes. First, let's talk about the mainstays. With our instance, Somersault and Discharge are just really powerful. This version of the list has more 3-block attacks to actually make use of the Somersault defensively, which is really nice versus some matchups like Enigma or Victor that might be a little more disruptive. If we can't find a turn to use this offensively, it can save us a bit of extra health. Discharge is just free damage. We, of course, have 3 CLV. Even though this is a Cheerios-based list, we actually have a fair amount of pitch in our deck, thanks to the inclusion of Eclectic Magnetism, which we will talk about later. So this card can easily stay around for a few turns and just get us some extra cards. Sigil of Brilliance, Sigil of Conductivity, and Sigil of Lightning are all at 3 copies because, of course, we're playing Oscilio. And then Blink just being really good on smaller Gone in a Flash turns, so you can maybe like play it twice, pick it back up twice, arsenal it again. Other cards that are just mainstays in Oscilio, I think Current Funnel, just because it's a 3-block blue and it's lightning. This card actually helped me win one of my games against a Victor, which generally, you won't really need to struggle against Victor, but, it was an awkward turn that Current Funnel just got me through really easily. Some of the burn spells, Mind Warp, of course, just one of the better burn spells, offering a lot of hand disruption. Etchings of Arcana, letting you pick up Sigil of Brilliance. This list is not on yellow etchings, it's only on the 3 reds, because this card can feel a little lackluster if you don't have a Sigil in your graveyard, which most of the time won't really happen if it's not a Brilliance or a Lightning. Sometimes it can be a discarded Conductivity, but getting that back doesn't matter all too much, although on turns where you're maybe comboing off, it can let you play an extra Gone in a Flash by getting this back, because this will have Go again off your Lightning Greaves. We, of course, have the 3 Flittering Charge, 3 Fries, and 3 Gons, because they're sort of just your best attacks. And we are only on 2 copies of Lightning Surge, Entwine Lightning, and Blast to Oblivion. Those are the 3 I want to talk about before we go over some of the other additions to the deck. And we're on 3 Comet Storm. I don't think I mentioned that one, but this card's too good to not play. 2 Lightning Surge, 2 Entwine Lightning, and 2 Blast to Oblivion. Why are we on specifically 2 of each main board? Well, because these cards all aren't as good as our other attacks. They all block 2, which means they're not better than things like Eclectic, Current Funnel, or Gone in a Flash. None of them have base Go again, so they're not as good as Fry. None of them, other than Entwine Lightning, can easily get Go again. Blast can never, unless we have a Lightning, Embodiment of Lightning, Lightning Surge. It's hard to get it in your arsenal. And Entwine Lightning is easy to play, but we have to fuse a Lightning card from our hand, and we're not on the most Lightning cards. We are on a lot, obviously, because we want to be using them, but if we have a hand where it's like that, a Sigil of Solace, and 2 burn spells, it kind of just doesn't do anything. In fact, Entwine Lightning is the card I end up cutting the most for some of our sideboard tech, but we'll talk about that later. Lightning Surge, I think, is probably not the best of them, but it's not the worst of the ones we're playing 2 of. It's just, if it's in your arsenal, it gets Go again. It can just be a 0 for 4 Chain Ender if you don't want to arsenal it or you can't. So it's fine at that. It's just good setup. If you find it in your hand at the end of a turn, you can arsenal it and save it for the next turn. It's a little awkward if you have an Embodiment of Lightning setup and you're playing this from your arsenal, but oh well, at least you did actually get to play a lightning action to start your turn to actually go into whatever else you want to, either it be a Current Funnel, another attack, or just a burn spell amped with Volzar, as well as it is a breakpoint for your CLV. Blast to Oblivion is definitely the best of the 3. Even though it can't innately gain Go again, things like Blink and Embodiments of Lightning can give us that, and if we find this with a Sigil of Brilliance and another instant, we can just draw another card. The problem I have with Blast to Oblivion is that it doesn't do anything outside of that. Yes, in some matchups like Ranger, we can bounce Plagues so we don't suffer the downside. And I guess into Enigma we can blow up Spectral Shields. But really the main use of this is for Sigil of Brilliance, sometimes Conductivity or Lightning to get a Go again. And outside of that, this card really doesn't do anything, which is why we're only on 2 of it. A lot of lists are on 3 just so you can try to find this plus Brilliance as easy as possible, but since we're a Cheerios list, we want to just always have the aggression, and where yes, this card can really win us a game on our combo turn, it doesn't help us really anywhere else. And finally, Entwine Lightning, the only reason that this card is at 2, it would be at 3 if it was a actual Lightning card. Since it's elemental, it doesn't increase our count for Volzar, which can hurt us when we're trying to land burn spells, considering we are on 12 of them in the main board. When this card comes out, it's even for another burn spell. Into your slower matchups, Entwine Lightning can feel a little weak. You have time to set up Lightning Surge, and you have time to combo with Blast to Oblivion. But in the slow matchups, since this doesn't uptick your Volzar, and your arcane damage matters a little more there, so you can chip them down, Entwine Lightning just falls flat on the use it has. So though into aggressive matchups you don't want Null Shock into, because that's the card we are adding instead of the Entwined Lightning. This can just be a 0 for 4 go again that threatens some decent damage, and those decks probably won't want to be blocking the Entwined Lightning anyway, so this card is just generally pretty useful in those situations. We do have a 60 card main board, which means we are subbing out some other cards, so we'll go over the sideboard and talk about that. Starting with the card, Null Shock. Null Shock is not really a main board card. In the original Oscilio Cheerios list, I said that this card could come in over some amount of yellow Etchings of Arcana, and here it is without any in the deck. So what changed? Yellow Etchings is really only useful if we have Sigil Brilliance. Even getting a Sigil of Lightning doesn't really feel worth it. I'd rather just have a different burn spell, which I just remembered we forgot to talk about a burn spell. Destructive Aethertide is a blue 3 block that does 1 arcane and blows up a card in Arsenal if we surge it. This is just some extra disruption and an extra burn spell that can easily block or be pitched to do any effect we really want. A lot of lists aren't playing this, and I think that's perfectly fine, but for a Cheerios list like this that wants to attack our opponent for a lot of damage and then threaten some form of card advantage, either that be returning a Brilliance with an Etchings or disrupting our opponent's hand with Mind Warp, being able to target their arsenal with Destructive Aethertide is incredibly strong. I did forget about that one. Back to Null Shock. Null Shock is a way to end out a game on an opponent's turn. We really are never playing it for the null, it's primarily for this 1-cost shock here. Yes, you can do the same thing with Comet Storm and Shock, but because Comet Storm and Shock costs 2, you're spending a lot of resources to actually do that, where Null Shock can come in for only 1 off of the Tunic with a full hand of Lightning Instants to just blow an opponent out of the water. Null does matter sometimes versus a matchup like Enigma. We can use it to counter something, and there's some other matchups where it could come up as well. But mainly this is for the 1-cost shock into those slower matchups. Something like Victor as well, I brought this in a lot against because Victor might want to, actually threaten us in the end game, but if we have this in our deck, it's just more things that make it so they can't spend their whole hand to try to attack us back, and if they do, well, they just die immediately to a Null Shock. Poison the Well is a instant that some people might not want to have in their deck. Some of these tech cards that are remaining are definitely designed to play into this current format, where Count Your Blessing decks can sometimes be pretty annoying, and some of our other matchups are covered by the other 2 cards in our sideboard, which we'll talk about. I never ended up playing against any Count Your Blessings decks, but it's better to be safe, I guess. You could consider bringing this one into... Well, you will bring this one into Verdance if you play against it, because you know that they're gaining life. You could also play this technically into any deck that you think is on Sigil of Solace, because you can get them for 3 on their Sigil, which is pretty cool. But mainly this card is for against Count Your Blessings decks. It's hard to know who's on Count Your Blessings unless you scope out the room, and at the event I played in, I don't think a single person was. So, and even if they were, it's pretty hard to play that into a deck like Oscilio, because even though the life gain can help you in those matchups, you are pitching a card to play it, and the card itself is no block, so you could end up just dying to the physical damage. So it's hard to do into this matchup, but people will do it, and Poison the Well can actually just get them. There was never a matchup I brought Poison the Well into in the ProQuest because there was no Verdance and no Count Your Blessing, but, I think it's better to be safe. If you know there's going to be no Poison, or know there's going to be no CYB, or if they're just I thought there would be at least 1 Verdance, so I still thought I'd bring it. You could easily play a different tech card if you really wanted to. When I add in Poison the Well, I would consider going down, dependent on what I'm playing against. If it's, your normal Count Your Blessing deck, which I believe currently is Enigma, you don't need Current Funnel as much, because you'll probably bring in Crown of Providence against Enigma anyway to try to deal with some disruption, so you can go down 1 of your Current Funnels, and then you could probably also go down 1 of your Sigil of Conductivities or a second Current Funnel, because, again, you don't really need current funnel there, and Sigil of Conductivity will never trigger, so if you just get one in play, you'll be fine. The next card is Snag. Snag is really only here for our new matchup. It's really the only thing that it's good against. Snag is a card that was very big in one of the previous metas for the Part the Misfail meta because of News dominance. Zen would play it a lot because of News disruption really hurting you, and none of the other aggro decks in the format actually get to slot Snag against New, which means New has a pretty good matchup into all of them. Except us, of course, because we are a deck that can just get rid of instants whenever we want. They're generally never dead cards. Snag can be a way to turn our equipment into a free entire turn defense. If our opponent decides to throw a strong disruptive 1 power thing, Snag makes sure that it can never go above that 1 power, allowing us to easily block it with one of our 1 block equipment in the Lightning Greaves of the Aether Bindings, or with our Crown of Providence, which we probably want in that matchup to deal with things like Command and Conquer as well as Leave No Witness. So Snag is just a really nice tool for this deck to have. There was one new at the event. I never played against them, so I never brought in the Snag, but I do think that this card is probably going to end up being a mainstay right now, because, you know, New is pretty good into aggro, and if you're playing against the New, you need Snag, because some disruptive effects into you really, really hurt if they can get rid of a whole line of your burn spells or some other piece in your deck, because you kind of need most of the red things, and if you have to end up blocking with them or playing them, you know, their disruption did still get you. The last non-equipment card in our inventory is Truce. Truce is a 2-cost 3-block generic action aura. It says when it enters the arena, choose an opponent. At the beginning of their end phase, you destroy this and each of you gain 3 life. And whenever you or a card you control is the target of an attack they control, destroy this and draw a card. Truce will come in versus aggro matchups if you are going first. There's a reason for this. If you're going first, that means that you attacking on the first turn is just giving your opponent a chance to cycle. Since you're Oscilio, you pretty much just get to cycle for free, so you have a higher chance to actually draw this Truce. What Truce lets you do is it lets you set up a 6-card hand against the aggro decks. Either A, they hit you and you get to draw a card and get a 6-card hand, card in arsenal, 5 in hand, ready to go. Hopefully your hand after that's pretty good. Aggro matchups are still pretty fast, but hopefully a 6-card will let you threaten enough damage to make them block a turn earlier, which when an opponent has to block in an aggro matchup, it's pretty dang good. And then B, they don't attack you, IP whatever themselves, and both of you gain 3 life, which could be bad because you're the aggro deck, but they're also the aggro deck, so it's a 3 life buffer for you. And you're a little more scary in those late game situations because you could just draw a hand that kills them on their turn. You are a wizard with shocks. Truce, other than that, is a 3-block blue. This card is really bad if you draw it not on turn 1. Yes, your opponent could take the Truce turn to set up as well, which would suck, but that's why you bring it in going first and not second as well. Yes, you give them the chance to set up on turn 2 going second, so their first turn, but well, if they had that hand already, they should have just went first to set up. And now you, as the person who is now on their second turn, have a chance to threaten them to lose something. Either it be disrupt them with Mind Warp or Destructive Aether Tide. So, them passing to you after setting up a few cards still isn't that bad. And outside of that, it just blocks 3. If you draw this card late game, it's probably going to end up killing you, but you need to be on 3 so you can see it on turn 1. Even drawing it on turn 1 does not mean you win the game, by the way. I've had games where I've played this turn 1 and then proceeded to not draw a Sigil of Brilliance for 6 turns and then lose. It just happens. It's pure RNG, but Truce will help you win those aggro games if you get it out turn 1. And then going second, don't play it because, hey, if you draw it turn 1 going second, you're not going to want to set up turn. You're going to want to actually swing at them. So Truce doesn't do anything. I believe Enigma also plays this a lot. Enigma actually played against me in top 8. So some of the slower decks might also be playing Truce, so do be careful about that. It is a card good into you as well, just because it lets them get a bigger hand, defend a little easier. But since this is a slower aggro deck, it's good into these slower decks, where we're a little weaker into the aggro decks, so Truce helps us in those faster matchups. When you want to bring in Truce, and I don't think I talked about Snag either, I tend to go down Current Funnel, mainly because I want the Arsenal disruption from the Destructive Aether Tide. Actually, sorry, when you go up Snag, I would go down Blink, because New can't really play Current Funnel, and they can't really amp Destructive Aether Tide, so at most what they're stealing from you is going to be Sigil of Lightnings, if they decide to use their hero ability. So Snag is, so you don't want to give them Blinks, because that actually lets them play more funnels or more of their actual attacks. And then when I go up Truce, I'd go down the Current Funnels, because even though Current Funnel blocks 3, so does Truce, and it's hard to actually play out Current Funnel. The only thing it does over Truce in those matchups is be a Pitch Lightning card for Channel Lightning Valley. But in aggro matchups, unless you find it extremely early, CLV just ends up being a discard to Oscilio to try to find a real attack or something that actually helps you deal damage, like Discharge or Somersault, or even like a Sigil of Solace to gain some life. And then finally, let's talk about the equipment of the deck. We have 5 sideboard equipment. Let's start with the one I already kind of talked about, Findle Spring Tunic. This one will come in versus your slower matchups. Enigma, Victor, anything that's going to go later, you'll want it. Most matchups you bring in Null Shock. Think of it like that. Matchups that you bring in Null Shock, you'll want to bring in the Findle Spring Tunic. Just because, well, you need the extra resource to play the Null Shock, don't you? That's mainly what this card's for. It does have 1 extra block, which can help sometimes, but you're not really bringing it into the aggro matchups. Crown of Providence is a headpiece that will come in versus matchups that are going to try to disrupt you, mainly with things like CNC. Any deck that you know is going to throw CNC at you, except Brute, because we want Balanced Justice versus Brute. But decks like Victor and Enigma, those Guardian or Illusionist matchups that are trying to disrupt you with the standard 2 for 6 cards, you want to bring in Crown of Providence because it allows you to cycle away that arsenal, as well as Assassin. You'll want to bring in Crown of Providence because just it makes it so some of their disruption doesn't impact you, and it's their main disruption that Crown of Providence stops. We have other ways to stop some of their other forms of disruption, either it be blocking and then somersaulting, or by just taking it on the chin, or putting 1 equipment in front and playing Snag, right? So Crown of Providence can help us versus the harder hitting disruption that they play. Balance of Justice is going to come in versus our Brute matchups because of, Blood Urge Bellow. And it's also going to come in versus Dash IO, because Dash IO does draw a lot of cards. She is a pretty bad matchup now because of just how much she can draw. She can just drown you in card advantage, and you can't really fatigue her because half of your deck doesn't block. So Balance of Justice can help you, similar to Truce in that sense, to try and, get an extra card to maybe make them block sooner. And then finally, we have 2 pieces of equipment just for some of our arcane-focused matchups. Shock Charmers will come in versus, realistically, any wizard, either that be Oscilio, Verdance, or Kano, because they all want to do bigger hits of arcane. Verdance and Oscilio actually can throw physical damage, though, so it's better to bring in some other pieces of equipment. You could argue no other head. You could argue just play Spellfray Tiara into Verdance, but most of the time it'll be Crown or Flash of Brilliance because that's a more combo-based matchup. I'd actually recommend Flash there because they don't play CNC most of the time. And if they do, oh well. Right, they're playing a CNC, they're not playing a burn spell. But you do want Shock Charmers because their combo turn can hurt, alleviating their Surgeon. Or is it, what's the weapon called? The one from Dynasty. That weapon, you can alleviate some of that damage, which will hurt their next card as well. The pitch can also keep CLV in play, which sure matters versus specifically just Verdance, but it's still a good card into those matchups. And then finally, Spellfray Tiara, which will only come in versus Kano because they don't play any attacks, so we don't need any of our blocking helmets. You could argue balance into Kano, but the one prevention is pretty important. We can't actually play our action burn spells on our opponent's turn. Wildfire only impacts actions, which means if we try to shock them with an instant burn spell on our turn, we can't really do it. If they go off on an Eclectic, which we will talk about because I wanted to save this card towards the end specifically to talk about, it's End Sigil of Solace because these two cards were not in the original deck list. And I think Eclectic might have been in the sideboard, but these two I do want to talk about because they are brand new additions to, I'm pretty sure Eclectic is, but Sigil definitely is, to the deck. And I also didn't talk about E-Strike, but oh well, play E-Strike main board, it's a good card. But Spellfray Tiara is just specifically for Kano. I didn't play against any Kanos, but there was one at the event, and it can be a tough matchup because it's just, do they combo you before you kill them? This can help you not die to a combo. To wrap up the video, I want to talk about the last few cards in our deck, Sigil of Solace and Eclectic Magnetism, and also talk about my matchups. I played in a ProQuest with 27 people. I don't know the exact split of the decks, but to me it seemed like a lot of Viserai, Aurora, and Enigma, as well as Victor. Those were definitely the 4 most played decks. Maybe it was like 3 Viserai, 4 Aurora, 4 or 5 Victor, and 5 Enigma, something like that. And then the rest of the decks were all like 1-offs or 2-offs. Like there were 2 Riptide, 1 Oscilio, which was me, 1 Vincent, I think 1 Dorinthia. I don't think there was a single Brute at the event, which was a little surprising. I didn't see a single KO or Levia. Which is pretty interesting. There was 1 new, no other assassins, no Azuri. So, some of the matchups I did tech into, I guess, because there was only 1 new, but I brought 3 snag because it's a bad matchup. I thought more people would be playing new, but more people opted to play things like Enigma or Victor into the aggro decks, which would be pretty prominent. 2 cards that, other than E-Strike, I did forget. To be honest, I did forget to go over E-Strike in the original go-around. This card's just really flexible and really good. If you give it an embodiment of lightning, you can get to draw a card for free or throw it for 7, and it's a great chain ender or 2-card hand play if you want to keep an arsenal. So play E-Strike. It's also 3-block for Somersault. But Sigil of Solace and Eclectic Magnetism. So these 2 actually matter for 2 reasons. Sigil of Solace matters because it's an instant that lets you keep a life buffer. Instead of Discharge being something that might make your opponent block with an extra card, Sigil of Solace gaining you life is really important. One of my games against a Victor, I did an early combo turn that involved 2 Sigil of Solace, and it gave me enough of a life buffer to where it didn't matter what my opponent threw at me. I could just take it and then keep trying to kill them without the threat of dying because I was 6 life higher now, and that's pretty good versus a deck that needs to kill you to actually win the matchup because they can't fatigue you because of how high your arcane damage is. So Sigil of Solace is really good there, as well as into aggro decks. Sigil of Solace can be really nice. Again, for that same reason of the life buffer, if you play them early, you get to pretty much for free gain extra life and not lose anything for it. And it sometimes is the difference between having to block and not having to block and threatening your opponent for game. Sigil of Solace wasn't something I had in the original Cheerios list, but playing it now, it's definitely a card that I would 100% add to that deck to just because it's really consistent. The only downside is it's not lightning, and that's fine. As well as if we don't need the life, if it's like 36 to 4 already, we can always just discard it to Oscilio. The other card is Eclectic Magnetism. This card was originally Weave Lightning in my list. And considering what I played against, I'm better off playing the Eclectic Magnetism. Just because this card, even though I really don't like it, it has a lot of things about it that make it really nice. To sort of go over it, let's talk about my actual event. Round 1, I played against no one. I got a bye, which was really nice. I got to see the rest of the room. I saw that actually, there was one Azalea. Notably, they were a newer player, so I was watching their game because they were playing against one of my friends at the event. But it's good to see that newer players are actually coming to these bigger events. It means the game is obviously growing, which is really good. And there were a few other newer players as well that were pretty local to my area that decided to come out and play, which is really good. But I did get a bye round 1. So I did see generally what decks were at the event, and I saw it was a lot of control decks, which is really, really good for Oscilio. As I kept saying in this video, Oscilio is really good versus slower decks, but really bad versus faster decks. So let me explain that a little more. Oscilio as a hero tends to play a lot of cards that don't block, which means in the aggro matchups, it's harder to defend your life total with key pieces from hit effects, because not all of your cards can actually defend you. And he also has a lot of 2 blocks because he's traded. So your games tend to end up being, I'm just going to take all this damage and try to kill you, which into aggro decks, try and do the same plan. It hurts a little bit because you're not as fast as them. You don't do as much damage as them. My matchup into Dash.io in round 3, which was my only loss in the 5 rounds of Swiss that we played. Yes, I got super high rolled early because they saw all 3 processors turn 1, pitching 1, tutoring 1, and playing 1 from hand. So they had 2 in hand and they tutored 1 with the Spark of Genius. So yes, I got super high rolled. But oh well, it was a bad matchup anyway. It was very close though, even though they got there with a ton of card draw, because Oscilio can still win those aggro matchups, it's just harder. Where Oscilio really shines, it's versus the slower matchups. Your Victor and your Enigma. Against the Enigma, I did fumble a little bit, so they did get an actual foothold to beat me. But oh well, bad draws happen. But into the main bulk of the slower matchups, into Enigma, into Victor, into any of that, Oscilio is really good because he just gets to set up these massive turns and just blow your opponent up. You can play so many lightning cards in a turn with somersaults, with Gone in a Flash combo turns. It just lets you build up so much damage on a Volzar that a well-timed etchings can keep you in the game longer by letting you get a brilliance back. Some disruption can mess them up pretty hard. Most of the matchups against the victors that I played came down to a turn where they had to block and I mind warped away their 2-card hand and they just had nothing to do. So I just got another free turn after and could just keep up the aggression. So the actual impact that your cards have into those slower matchups, especially because you're all breakpoints as well. So you're going to chip through a lot of damage. And since you're a deck that goes so tall with Arcane, if your opponent doesn't defend themselves enough, they just get so low that they die to 1 to 2 burn spells, and there's nothing they can do against it because they're only bringing in 2 to 3 AB max, and they can't do anything against you because you're a wizard. But again, aggro matchups are tougher. So what do we do to help with that? That's why we bring in Eclectic Magnetism. Eclectic is a 1 for 3. It is 5 base power, so it is a breakpoint. But into the aggro decks, a lot of them have a lot of 2 blocks, which means that if they want to fully block the Eclectic, they'll have to spend a 3 and a 2, and they can't just spend 2 2s to block it. Now, yes, they can spend equipment, that's fine. It costing 1 can hurt sometimes, but it can also help because it can be hard to get a card in our pitch for Channel Lightning Valley. As well as this card blocks 3, which is important for our Somersault, because that means we have 12 attacks in our deck that have 3 block, so we can block 6 and pick both up with Somersault, which is a really nice tool to actually let this be a 6 block card. The other thing it does is when it attacks, you can play a non-attack action card this Chain Link as though it were an instant. This matters versus both aggro and slow matchups. In the slow matchups, a 1 for 5 is pretty threatening to their life total as well as any permanents they may have on board, as well as the fact that straight afterwards we get to throw a burn spell at them. Either it be a massive Comet Storm or a Surge piece. The 5 power can make way out of cards in their hand that might be able to pitch to your Arcane, or any auras in play to try and actually land these impactful surge effects. And since we get to do them at instant speed, this card will not only count as lightning for Volzar, but again, just also be threatening damage on its own, which is really good. It comes in, if we have a Sigil in play as well, it can just be a blue pitch for it and a Comet Storm, which is really, really good. And even on low card hands, this off Tunic plus a burn spell, if we have a Sigil in play, say we have a Conductivity in play, and our hand is this plus Mind Warp, we can Tunic to throw this, activate Volzar, and then throw a Mind Warp for 3. They either take 5 and AB 1 to keep a 4 to 5 card hand, or they just take a bunch of damage and lose everything, or block everything and don't have a hand. So Eclectic has the usefulness in those types of matchups as well. Again, being a 3 block is super useful. Most of the cards in this deck don't block. The extra health that it can get you, even if you're only blocking with it, is really, really good. So Eclectic is a card I'm really glad I played. I could see a reason to go to 2. Don't get me wrong, you could go to 2 Eclectic, but because we're 12 burn spells main board, especially because we're on the blue Aether Tides, just having extra burn spells in our deck means that we want the Eclectic Magnetism. So I kept going back to my what I played against, so I'm actually going to fully go over that because to end out the video, because we talked about every card. Round 1 I did get a bye, as I said. Round 2 I played against Victor. I cut the Entwine Lightnings for Null Shocks, and then I played Tunic and Crown of Providence instead of Blossom of Springs and Flash of Brilliance, because they have CNCs, we need to use that to stop them, and they're a longer game, and we're bringing Null Shocks, so we want Tunic. I got them pretty low, and I could end the game with a big burn spell because, again, we are very good in those slow matchups. Round 3 I played against Dash.io. I already said I got super high rolled, but it was still an extremely close game. A well-timed Sigil kept me in, but then I drew a hand of all instants and couldn't defend myself at all. So, rip there. But that was the last turn of their Tekla core, which means that if I did live that turn, I could have had a shot to maybe stay alive a bit or find a burn spell to end out the game. Round 4, I played against another Victor, which was the one that I got off in early Gone in a Flash combo to play Sigils of Solace. Notably, Lightning Greaves combo with Gone in a Flash is how you will win most of your games. The only game I didn't actually get it off was versus the Enigma, because I never saw a Gone in a Flash. But versus all the other matchups, I used it to either get my opponent low enough to win or get my opponent low enough to where they needed to block. Like in the Dash.io game, I did that. They got pretty low, but I just couldn't end it out. But against that second Victor I played in round 4, I got 2 sigils off in the same combo turn, and their damage just didn't impact me anymore, so I just got to end it through just raw damage. And then finally, for round 5, I played against a Riptide. Against Riptide, I thought it'd be a pretty long game. I didn't know if they were aggro or a slower version of Riptide, but I decided to hedge on the slower version. The reason being is because I felt that Riptide would want to bring a slower type of matchup into most aggro decks, which we were. So I decided to go up the Final Spring Tunic for the Blossom of Spring and go up the Null Shocks instead of the Entwine Lightning. Because also it's harder to interact with the burn spell than it is in Twine Lightning with traps. And then I can't remember if I swapped my helmet out, but I think I might have just kept the Flash of Brilliance because I didn't think they were a deck that would play many like CNCs and stuff, and then turn 1 they CNC me. So I did block it and it was fine. I did win that matchup against the Riptide, and that was a win and in, but they actually did get top 8 as well. They got 8th place exactly, so pretty nice there. Pretty nice for the Riptide, he still got top 8 as well. Round 1 of top 8, I did lose against an Enigma. I already talked about it. I did draw pretty well in the early game. I got off, and I actually didn't get off a gun in a flash combo, but I got off some really good damage early. I just had a few turns where I fumbled, and then they got a really good hand, 2 hands in a row, and came back and won. But it was a very close game. If I just had 1 extra turn of aggression, I think I would have got there. I like fumbled on the exact same turn they had like Sacred Art Mirror Guy, and it just killed me. But still a really good showing from Oscilio Constella Intelligence. Definitely my favorite deck this set, one I'm going to be playing a lot. I don't know if I'm going to end up be playing too much Ira, but of course, next week, since I'm only playing in 1 ProQuest, we will have the Ira deck going up next week for y'all. So look forward to that one. And also, this is going up on Halloween, so happy Halloween. And yeah, that's really it. I guess we'll know as well what the next set is this week, because this weekend is Osaka. I'm not going, sadly, but oh well. So if you are going to that, good luck in anything you play. And if you're just looking for a fun deck to play, I think Oscilio is pretty good. I will make notes like I did for all my other deck lists. That will be up there when this video goes up on the deck list, and I'll make the deck list public. I gotta do that for a lot of the Rosetta ones. But that's gonna be about it. I know this was a bit of a long one because you know, this is kind of like the Icelander one I did for Nats, where I went over my Nats deck list. You know, I kind of got to explain a lot, but because this is the list that I actually played, I had to explain all my reasonings for all the stuff that I did. So yeah, that is Cheerios Oscilio ProQuest Top 8 deck list. And with that, I'll see y'all in the next one. Goodbye.